What is going on, all of you cross-dimensional travelers out there in the world? I am MegaAmpster. Thank you for clicking on this video. If you're new here, hey, great to have you here. Welcome to the video. Welcome to the channel. You are a returning viewer. Always good to see you here. Thank you for the continued support. I have a bone to pick with some of you today. And when I say some of you, I mean the really toxic people on Twitter. Not that they're going to watch this video, but hey, you never know. I want to talk about why 2D versus 3D games, there's no right or wrong choice. They are both valued, it's very subjective, and why both have their place, and I think in a lot of cases, they can coexist together for the same franchise. Now, you know me, well, if you're a returning viewer, you know me, I stick to mainly Sonic and Nintendo related games, so that's really what I'm going to be focusing on today with this video topic, but it can be applied to almost any genre, really, or any franchise, I should say, but, you know, some here and there maybe wouldn't work so well. But the ones I'm going to talk about today, it would just make sense. 2D versus 3D games, right? Obviously, 2D games, you're limited in terms of movement compared to 3D games. You have one less axis to work with. But at the same time, having that limitation can honestly make the gameplay smoother, I personally find. It really depends on the game. It depends on what kind it is. But, you know, like, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. But both are different enough to the point where, even for the same franchise, they can feel completely different, but both have their own place. And I kind of wanted to talk about, you know, what franchises do this well today, what franchises could see this do well, and, you know, where we could go from here. So, yes, very subjective take. There's no right answer versus whether 2D or 3D is better. It's whatever suits your needs. And honestly, for me, it depends on the game. You know, certain games I like in 3D more, some games I like in 2D more. And there's no monetary worth with those games. You know what I mean? It's like, for example, the 2D Metroid Dread being $60. That whole debate a year and a half ago, I know I'm still bringing it up to this day. It still rubs me the wrong way. Personally, I found it worth $60, but someone else might not. You know what? That's okay. But just because it's a 2D game, to me, that does not mean it's worth $60. It is a very well-crafted 2D game. In fact, sometimes 2D games can just be better even crafted than 3D games, depending on, it's very variable, but you know what I mean. It kind of happens sometimes. So let's just kind of dive into this. You see, of course, you see what I did there? I was clever, Magalore, you know, traveling between dimensions. No, I'm not clever, I promise. It took me a while to come up with that, actually. But I want to highlight a couple franchises that actually do this pretty well that I am personally a fan of, and you can probably don't look at the tabs. Don't look at the tabs. It's gonna spoil it. One franchise that, okay, you know what? To put this out of order, let's go with the franchise that I think has honestly done the best job of having both 2D and 3D games coexist. And like I was saying before, that is Metroid. Metroid has done such a good job, especially in recent years. You know, it wasn't always like this. But in recent years and like during like the 2000s era, right? Because now, of course, we have Metroid Dread here, just coming out, like I said, a year and a half ago as of this recording. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead because I know what they do in this trailer, and I still will never forgive Nintendo for doing it. The game's been out for a while, but I know, just in case, I don't know. 2D and 3D Metroid, right? We have the core 2D Metroid series, which has been going on since the NES days. We also have Metroid Prime in 3D, which has been going on since the GameCube days. And while both of these, you can tell that these two, like the 2D games and 3D games, they belong to the same franchise. Of course, it's Samus. They're all still, you know, Metroidvanias at the end of the day. They're all about search action. Is that what Nintendo likes to call Metroid now? They're all about that exploration and upgrading abilities and slowly getting more powerful. They're always about that. They've always had really good atmosphere. The music, oh, fuck you, Nintendo. They have certain things better than others. And it's like, you can tell they're both part of the same franchise. But what makes it special is that, you know, you can have a preference as of 2D versus 3D games. Personally, especially after Dread, I vastly prefer the 2D games now. Prime is still great. I loved playing through Prime Remastered. I enjoyed playing the other Prime games a good amount. I still just personally prefer the 2D games, but there is a place for both of these styles of games in here because they are different enough while also feeling fairly similar. You know, with the Prime series, they're first-person shooters at the end of the day with action exploration. You know what I mean? They're first-person Metroidvanias, whereas, you know, the 2D games are third-person, of course. You're not going to have that first-person view with a 2D game like that. So they kind of stand out on their own. You can even just tell from the gameplay, like, how different yet similar they are. But I think they both have their place, and it seems like going forward, we're in good hands because Prime 4 is still coming out, supposedly. We got to hear more information about that, but we just had Prime Remastered, so I'm sure we'll hear something I feel like we're going to hear something about Prime 4 this year, but that's another topic. And the 2D games, there was that rumor a couple months ago that the next 2D Metroid game's in development. And I mean, isn't Metroid Dread like the best-selling 2D game at this point? Correct me if I'm wrong, but Prime Remaster is probably outselling Dread. But like, Metroid Dread has sold so well to the point where Nintendo's not just going to ignore it. They're probably going to have Mercury Steam work on the next game. Why wouldn't they? It's sold quite well on its own. And so having these options is great for people who have different tastes. Or if you're like me and you enjoy the hell out of both, great, more variety. It's always good to see, you know? And Metroid has been doing such a good job of this. I feel like, especially recently, like in the last like few years even, and also like 2000s era when we had like, what was it? Didn't Prime and Fusion, did they launch on the same day? I know it was the same year. It might even be the same day, which would be absurd. But hey, like Nintendo knew they're both different, you know, different kinds of games, and they were on separate platforms, so that made even more sense. But even on the same platform with the Switch, you know, it's like there's a place for both 2D and 3D games. There really is, and it's cool to see the distinction and the variety, and see how just adding another axis can completely change a game while still being core to its roots. And that's what Metroid excels at. I'm done gushing about Metroid because I could do it all day, but Metroid just, while not all the games are perfect, I think it's done the division between 2D and 3D so particularly well, and both have relevance in today's gaming space. So I don't want to hear anything about, oh, Dread's 2D, it's not worth the money. Shut up. Adding another axis does not make a game more worth it. If it's more worth it to you, by all means. That's a personal thing. It's very subjective. By all means, you have that thought. But for me, no. It's like, it's a no-brainer. Now, a franchise that I want to go into that has struggled a bit more. But, and I hate to say it's still going, it's tough. Because I want to believe it's still doing the 2D and 3D separation, but who's to say? It kind of is, but it's also tough. I want to talk about Sonic, right? I want to talk about Sonic because, yes, just about 6 years ago, I can't believe it's going to be 6 already, Sonic Mania was released onto the world. Debatably my favorite game of all time. And you know me, I'm a diehard Sonic fan. I love Sonic. Mania shows that there is a place for 2D Sonic in today's day and age. And I mean, the most recent example, I hesitate to say it's still going on, is because we're getting the Origins collection. We had Origins. Origins Plus is coming out in a month as of this recording. And, you know, that's awesome. I mean, they're just re-releases of the older games with some enhancements. We're getting Amy as a playable character. We're getting the Game Gear games back. Great, good stuff. You know, I'm glad they're adding new content. I mean, they're kind of following the pattern that they did with Mania, actually, because this is the trailer for Mania Plus, which had new characters and, like, remixed special stages and zones and stuff like that, you know? So it's kind of a similar model there. So they're still kind of doing 2D Sonic, and at this point, I think after Forces, they're done with trying to force 2D Sonic into the 3D games. I think that they realize, you know what, people don't want that anymore. We're going to have it be separate. And I really still hope there was another new 2D game in the works. I really do hope so. I think Sega sees the value in that. I mean, I know there's probably a bit of jealousy with, you know, the Christian Whitehead team coming in and making, like, one of the best received Sonic games of all time. But, like, at the same time, I hope they can realize that, like, yeah, there is value in having a separation. And what's even better now, you know, I mentioned before with Metroid, it's good to have, you know, some common ground between the 2D and 3D subsections of a franchise, but also, you know, have plenty of differences. And Metroid is one of those cases where there are, I think, more similarities than differences. It's really just the axis change, and, like, Prime focuses on the beams a lot in the visors. But with Sonic now, especially after Frontiers, now that we're living in a post-Frontiers world, this is Sega's chance to make 2D Sonic even more relevant, because Frontiers is a brand new breaking off point for the Sonic franchise, you know? And, like, clearly it sold well. It's been doing well. We're getting more DLC, and I'm sure the next game, it's going to be in this kind of open zone formula. And you know what? Honestly, great. Frontiers is my favorite, most recent modern Sonic game since Generations. I think it's definitely my favorite one. I might even like it more than Generations and Unleashed. Like, I'm debatably in that camp because, you know, it's focused on that exploration. It's fun to just explore. I was a madman and went out of my way to collect every single memory token. Not necessary for 100% completion, but I did it anyway. I got all the music for the Wave 1 DLC, and I'm very much looking forward to the next 2 waves, especially the story DLC. But what's cool here is that modern Sonic is so different than classic Sonic now. So while they're still all about, like, high-speed platforming, they're very, very different. The 2D and 3D games for Sonic are now way more different than like 2D and 3D Metroid, for example. Those are still the same kind of game. But this, to me, makes it even more worth it to have these two separate sub-series kind of going on, you know? Make new 2D games. Or, I mean, hey, do another collection. I don't know. I'd prefer new 2D games. And keep going with the Frontiers model and just kind of like switch off, because not only do you get that variety, you also get, you know, if you have two different teams working on each set of games, you technically get more games that way. You know what I mean? It's nice to have that variety, and I think Sonic has the potential to be like Metroid. Will it ever be that? Probably not. I put too much faith in Sega, and I've lost so much hope over time. But Sonic has the potential to be like Metroid, where both 2D and 3D games have value, and they can easily coexist because they're so different, but each has their own perks. You know what I mean? Which is really cool to see. Now, to tie this in, this is honestly kind of similar. Not to go into some franchises that I think really could benefit from this, and they've kind of done this in the past a little bit, but I think even more so now. One that's actually not too far off from Sonic, and you might be like, what are you talking about? How is this franchise related to Sonic in any way? But let's jump into Zelda, because, man, I miss 2D Zelda. I miss this style of Zelda. Link Between Worlds, one of my favorite Zelda games. Super duper creative. Absolutely love it. Now, take 2D here as a loose term, because I'm mainly talking about like that top-down style that, you know, we had with the Link's Awakening remake, and now people are hoping for like Oracle game remakes and stuff like that. Minish Cap, Link to the Past, and like Between Worlds, kind of the OG Zelda. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, there's a Link to the Past, but we don't count that. I still think there is a massive place for a game like this in the Zelda franchise today, because in a Breath of the Wild and almost post Tears of the Kingdom world, those games have really digressed. Kind of like Sonic Frontiers has digressed from the other 3D Sonic games, you know, like Generations, Colors, Unleashed, all those. 3D Zelda with Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild have diverged even more from the typical 3D games. Now, what was interesting for a while before Breath of the Wild, right? You could argue the top-down Zelda games and the fully 3D Zelda games pretty much had the same setup, you know? You have some stuff to collect, you gotta go through like 8 different dungeons, you get a unique item and fight a unique boss per dungeon, and get the final boss. All of that, exploration up the wazoo. And Breath of the Wild and probably Tears of the Kingdom have that, but obviously it's way more open. As Nintendo likes to call it, open air. It's a lot different. It leads to completely different progression than some of the other 3D Zelda games like Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, all of those. And what's funny is that, because, like, you know, now that we're in that breath, like, as much as I've said I'm not the biggest fan of the open games, I will say the best thing about that to me is that it allows for more diversity with some of the other types of games we can get from these franchises, because now we don't have the top-down 2D Zelda games and the 3D Zelda games pretty much following the same gameplay formula, you know? Which, I mean, I did kind of say earlier that, you know, Metroid Prime and 2D Metroid were kind of like, but I think in Metroid's case, it works to its own strength. Here, now that we have Breath of the Wild and just so close, just about Tears of the Kingdom, we now live in a world where top-down 2D Zelda has even more relevance, because we're not getting 3D games at the same time in that same structure. You know, you look at Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time, the more you think about it, the more it's literally just 3D Link to the Past. You know? And now we're in a spot where Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom have their own open exploration type of style. And, you know, personally, I do prefer that old traditional style of the top-down 2D Zeldas. And that has even more significance now, which is awesome. I would love to see Nintendo do that now, because it would feel completely different. And, you know, people wouldn't be upset. I don't think people would be like, oh, why are they not working on the next open Zelda game? No, because it's a top-down 2D game. We're going to get that open Zelda game after this anyways. It's like, you can have these games coexist, you know what I mean? And it shouldn't offend anyone. It will, because it's the internet, but it shouldn't. Both of these kinds of games can coexist. And honestly, the more different they are, without going too far and being completely different franchises at that point, it's like, the better, because we get more variety. It's awesome to see stuff like that. Like, look at Cadence of Hyrule. That's another cool example of a 2D game that was in the same franchise, obviously done by indie developers, so it's a bit of a stretch, but still very different, and offers a refreshing take, and it can exist alongside games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Has their own little things. I would buy a Link Between Worlds style game for $60 on the Switch. 70, maybe not, but $60, even depends. If it's just Link Between Worlds, maybe. I would, because there's so much variety there, and I think there's still a place for that formula. If 3D Zelda is going to continue to follow this more open structure, which, depending on how Tears of the Kingdom sells, which is going to sell a lot, probably will, you know, there's a lot of potential for that old 2D formula to still exist. And a couple other franchises, not to make this video too long, that I think that could work out for. One of which, let's jump into Mario, right? Let's jump into Mario, because when's the last time we had a new 2D Mario game? There was Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, I think, but Super Mario Bros. U, the original release on Wii U, I think was the last new 2D Mario game. And of course, we have a Mario Odyssey for 3D Mario. We assume they're working on the next 3D game, which I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. But this is another franchise where I really think 2D Mario could shine, because 2D Mario can be very refined. I mean, I guess if you count Mario Maker 2 as 2D, that was the most recent one. Look at some of the level design in like Super Mario Maker and the sequel on Switch, for example. Like, clearly Nintendo still has ideas for 2D level design, and a lot of that they can't accomplish in 3D. It's just a completely different dimension, you know? Whereas 3D Mario, looking great. Give us another Odyssey type of game, I would love that. But like, a new 2D Mario honestly could be really good. I'm a little hesitant if they do another new Mario game, but I feel like Nintendo has to know they've exhausted that a little bit at this point. I'm surprised they haven't done another like brand new 2D game at this point. You know what I mean? I guess Mario Maker 2 you can kind of count, but like Mario's another great example where I think they feel so different that I think it's totally feasible, especially with, you know, because originally we had like 3D World and even Galaxy to some degree where they really were like 3D games with the 2D formula. But if we're going to continue in the direction of Odyssey, you know, that's completely different from the 2D formula. It's more open like Mario 64. I would argue it's even more open than Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine in some areas, you know? But it's like closer to those games, and it's way more open and non-linear, whereas something like, you know, the 2D Mario games obviously have a more linear structure, and that's just the way they are, you know what I mean? There's a lot of potential to have those. This song gives me, it kind of triggers me a little bit from Metroid. Great song for this footage. But, you know, both of these have the ability to coexist. One last one I want to talk about before I end this video. One I want to go in depth about, I should say, is Kirby. Because Kirby is the one that I'm not super sure about where it's going to go. Because, you know, we had Kirby Forgotten Land last year as of this recording. You know, Kirby's kind of debut in 3D, but it followed the 2D formula almost to a T. Forgotten Land is one of those games that's really just 2D Kirby in 3D, kind of like Mario 3D World was for Mario. You know, it's not a Sonic Frontiers, it's not a Breath of the Wild for Kirby. I wouldn't even say it's a Mario Odyssey for Kirby, you know? It's a 3D Kirby game following the traditional 2D formula. This year, as of this recording, just a couple months ago, we got Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, a remake of the Wii game that came out 12 years ago as of this recording. So I'm kind of wondering, I don't want 2D games to be relegated to remakes. You know, what worries me is we've seen with Return to Dreamland for Kirby, we've seen with New Super Mario Bros. U for Mario, we've seen with Link's Awakening for Zelda, and I don't want them to be relegated to just remakes. I want them to be making brand new games still in 2D. I think there's a place for that, and Metroid's showing that there is, clearly. And if Metroid can do it, I think Kirby could do it. I think Zelda could totally do it. Zelda, out of all of them, is definitely the prime candidate for still having new 2D games coming out alongside the 3D ones. You know, but Kirby's a weird one, where unless they make a drastic change to the 3D formula, the big difference with Kirby, honestly, with Forgotten Land, isn't even just the dimension. It's the fact that you can upgrade the copy abilities. I feel like I don't see enough people talking about that, but that's like the big distinction with Forgotten Land, is the upgradable copy abilities. You know, and like that's something they could easily put into the 2D games. So I kind of want them to do something where it's like only they could only do this in 3D Kirby. Besides obviously the 3D movement, I want them to implement something where they could only do it with 3D Kirby. Let me know if there is something in Forgotten Land, but from what I recall playing it, it really does feel like a 2D game. Obviously more grandiose, but it's still that similar level design, you know, finding the Lost Waddle Dees, like any of that you could do in a 2D game. So unless they make that distinction in future 3D games for Kirby, which I don't know if they will, if they don't make that distinction, I think Kirby's going to be in that spot where we're only going to see the 3D games in the 2D formula, and then we're just only going to see 2D games for remakes or eShop games, you know? And it's unfortunate to say that, because I still think 2D Kirby has a place in this day and age, especially Return to Dreamland Deluxe is so smooth at 60 frames. It plays so well. It is one of the most refined Kirby experiences. I think it's more refined than Forgotten Land. I loved Forgotten Land, but Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe just feels so good to play because Kirby's always worked in 2D. And I think there is a place for 2D Kirby still. So hopefully they do stuff with that. Just a quick shout out to other franchises that could do it. I mean, Mega Man did do it for a while with, Classic and X being 2D, the Zero series, Battle Network, and then Legends, I think Legends could totally work. That could be a similar thing to like Metroid, where you have not quite first person shooter. I don't know if they would go first person for Mega Man Legends or any 3D game like that. They tried with Mega Man X7 too to go 3D. That did not work out too well, but I think the Legends formula seemed like it had a decent idea going with it. So that's another one. Castlevania is actually a great example of one that could be similar to Zelda in a way, because they have Lords of Shadow, which I know some people think are actually okay. And then, of course, there are just the classic 2D games. And I think both of those easily have a place in today's day and age. A new 2D Castlevania game and also have like a Lords of Shadow type, more like an action-y Dark Souls-like game. Great, and they're both in a Castlevania. Something like that, There are definitely franchises where this wouldn't apply. Like, would they ever make a 2D Dark Souls game? Probably not. But they could if they wanted to. There's totally a place for it. The whole point of this video was to discuss that, yes, 2D and 3D games both have a place in today's day and age. They each have their own benefits. They each have their own limitations. But I think by including both for a given franchise, have different teams work on different games, hell, I think you can add even more variety and really flush out a franchise even more. Metroid has greatly benefited from that. Zelda has greatly benefited from that in the past, and it could even more so now. Sonic has that potential. We'll see if they make another new 2D game. I don't know at this point. I don't know. I really hope for like a sequel to Mania or just a new 2D game. Kirby's a weird one where I don't know what they're gonna do. Kirby's in a weird state where they could just go full 3D and that's it. Which I'm not gonna be mad about. I really think 2D Kirby still has a place in today's day and age, with how well Return to Dreamland Deluxe plays and how well Planet Robobot, for example, Triple Deluxe play on a 3DS. Those were great. So with that, I'm gonna leave it here because this video is already super long. Let me know what you think about this topic, because I think both of these kinds of games have a place in today's day and age. And I keep hearing arguments about people only preferring 3D, and it's like, no. What we really should focus on now is different art styles, different innovations in gameplay. That's something Nintendo's always excelled at, and maybe I'm biased in that regard, but that's really what makes these games and new games and entries in these franchises, these legacy franchises, it makes them feel unique and fresh. Nintendo's always excelled at that. Sega has the potential to excel at that even more now at the 2D, 3D split. Hopefully they continue with that going forward. And I think a lot of other third-party companies, Pac-Man's another good example too, with Pac-Man World and the classic ones. A lot of these other companies have the ability to do that. Will they? I have no idea. We will see. But until next time, thank you for watching. I hope I'll catch you on the next video or live stream. Whatever dimension you're in, even if it's 1D or if you're in Shrek 4D, hey, enjoy life. Never can have enough Ds. Oh, God, that sounded awful. Bye.